Hi, everyone. I am Natalie Bouchard. Thank you so much for attending our virtual Better Bus meeting today. Before we get started, just some things to note. This meeting will consist of a presentation, and then there'll be an interactive live survey for those of you who are watching live, and then a question and answer portion. So for the live survey, there'll be a QR code and a link throughout the presentation, so feel free to join into that at any point. And then for the question and answer portion, feel free to leave your questions or comments in the chat throughout the meeting, and we'll address them at the end of the presentation. Um, if you have questions or feedback after the live meeting, you can email them to betterbus@publicinput.com. And if you're not able to participate live, we also have a survey that contains the same questions as the live survey. And I will leave the link to that in the caption of this video. So you feel free to answer that after this portion of the live session here. But I'll pass it over to Brian Horton, the project manager for Better Bus, to tell you all about it.
Thanks, Natalie. And thanks to those who are joining us live. Of course, this will be recorded and will be available to watch later too on the CATS YouTube channel. Today, we want to give an overview of our Better Bus Plan study, which really is growing out of a Envision My Ride initiative that you may be familiar with, and ultimately looking at ways to improve our bus service at CATS and thinking of a lot of new strategies to do that. So today we want to talk about some of the key recommendations that came from Envision My Ride, which was the prior plan that really set the foundation for the Better Bus study, give you an overview of what is entailed in Better Bus, kind of expectations and goals for the project. Why are we even doing this? Kind of the purpose of the project, a timeline of what we expect. It's about basically a year study, and what the time frame is for the key steps and phases of that study. Ultimately, when we look at transit, especially bus and the tools within bus service, what we're doing for transit planning. And then we'll have some discussion, including that interactive survey that Natalie mentioned, that you can participate live or participate later in a Better Bus, our publicinput.com link. Thanks. So first, let me give you a background about Envision My Ride, because that really is the foundation for Better Bus. So Envision My Ride had some clear goals to improve bus service, ultimately trying to create a more frequent bus route network, bus system, because frequency is really freedom when you're not held hostage to a schedule and you have more frequency on your routes to go more places more often and not have to rely on, services that are not running every 15 minutes or better. To create more direct service, so you don't have to, so you have a faster ride overall and get to your destination quicker. Develop more crosstown connections to not have such a single hub and spoke system that everything has to come into the center city or uptown Charlotte, and ultimately creating greater connectivity between all the routes. You'll hear some about how that's proposed to be done with mobility hubs or really enhanced transfer points that function more like a really nice place, almost creating station-like bus stops and transfer points for our system. Next slide. Right, so when we think of the Envision My Ride plan, there were a lot of key recommendations, but they really fall in these buckets of tools. And for example, microtransit's a newer bucket of tools that we'll talk a little bit about. And that really is similar to a lot of older demand response transit, but now leveraging newer technology, such as smartphones, but still having web-based backup and call center backup for those who don't have smartphones. So you can really schedule a trip when you need it and create more first and last mile services that connect and go beyond where a big bus can go. But even within the big bus system, using a lot of these tools to improve the overall experience. Such as dedicated bus lanes or even signal priority, such that when a bus approaches a signalized intersection, that the signal is timed in a way to maximize the green time for transit vehicles. So we think again about Envision My Ride, there really are three key pillars. There was the frequent route network. There was the microtransit zones that go beyond that frequent route network. And those are the gray blobs you see that were looked at high level in Vision My Ride. And those come together at what are called mobility hubs, both where the routes intersect each other, as well as where the routes connect with those microtransit zones. And mobility hubs, again, are those very important transfer points that function better, more like a station, more like a place, a gathering place, and have other connections, not just transit, but even micromobility, such as bike share, scooter, and greater walkability, connectivity to trails, connectivity to major activity centers. But again, all this network and all these network and system improvements were really based on these three goals: in connections, and ultimately treating bus as a priority within the street. It would improve the overall travel time of bus, enhancing that customer experience. Ultimately, that when you go to a bus stop and you have to wait for a service, waiting feels longer than moving. And that's ultimately how someone experiences a transit service before they even get onto a bus. So making sure all bus stops have better improvements in amenities, and especially those that are what are called mobility hubs, which are those more important transfer points, major stops, transit centers, stations, park and rides, where those connections are key. And ultimately improving overall access, because transit really is about access to opportunity, to jobs, to education, to essentials, to food. And knowing that bus is not always the right fit to go everywhere, but microtransit can provide a connection that goes beyond where a bus can go. Didn't advance on mine, sorry. That's okay. What's the next one? Okay, so what the time frame of Better Bus? Again, we start from the Vision My Ride plan, which really wrapped up in 2018, and or excuse me, the implementation we did for that was really based in 2018. For example, when the Blue Line extension opened, and we better connected a lot of the bus routes to the newly opened stations, the newly extended light rail line, but also looked at other parts of greater Charlotte, Mecklenburg, and how those bus routes connect. And then moved into a bus priority study that really expanded upon Vision My Ride, which you saw those key pillars of a high frequency route network, the mobility hubs, and microtransit zones. That was really, though, an unconstrained or not financially constrained vision. So it was really anything and everything that we thought were the best tools to really grow and better improve our bus network and system. Now with the Better Bus plan, we really are focused more on what are maybe near term or more effective, cost-effective implementation strategies that we can do in the near future, like say in the next 5 years. We'll still be looking at how that impacts the overall long-term vision, but really focusing more on what is needed to be done in the near future. And with that, then we expect some near-term service changes in 2025 and beyond that really can implement those key strategies. So why even do the Better Bus study? Because again, like in Vision My Ride, we have a lot of similar goals. Ultimately, we want to make it easier to use public transportation, to make the overall travel faster, because time is important when you're moving, going places. Time that you're on transit is time that you can't spend with your family, that you can't spend on your own. And so it's very important to get places faster. We want to improve overall connectivity to services, and especially for those who don't have the options of personal vehicles, that public transportation is such an important resource. And overall, improve access to communities and crosstowns, really connecting a lot of communities across greater Charlotte, Mecklenburg, and the towns within Mecklenburg, and not be so much focus always coming into uptown Charlotte. And so when we think about the Better Bus study, our plan, we have 3 key touch points. Those are those green boxes at the bottom in which we're doing public outreach. And right now we're in that phase 1. This is really just kind of overview of what Better Bus is, what expectations, goals of the project are, and some early input, such as the survey you'll see later, and kind of help us see what are the priorities that need to be worked on. And then we expect to come back in the fall where we present some early or initial draft recommendations and gather public input or reaction once again, and then really refine those going into winter, into early 2025. So what do we think about when we really are thinking about planning for transit, especially for bus and bus services? So when you do system design or corridor route design, there's some considerations to make, and there's some trade-offs in designing transit. For example, there's a trade-off between frequency and coverage. That if you try to serve every place directly or more closely to its endpoint, you may not have a straight line or direct route connecting those places. Now, granted, that can make it easier or shorten the walk to your final destination, but as a trade-off, you will have a longer ride, squiggling and moving about different streets to try to get closer to those points. Alternatively, you can get greater frequency by straightening out the route and having a faster overall time. So basically, for an opportunity of having 30-minute service reduced to 15-minute service, that's basically a doubling of vehicles. Well, if it doesn't take the vehicles as long to travel that route, it's more efficient to run that service frequently. And frequency then means you don't have to wait as long to take that service, which is then a trade-off of maybe walking a little bit farther from the stop to your final destination. But now with microtransit, you have this new tool that maybe can make up the difference in places where a big bus can still be more direct and more frequent on major corridors. Microtransit has the opportunity to still deviate by request on demand and go to those places where getting a little bit closer to one's destination maybe is more important than taking a high frequency transit line. And microtransit can operate essentially with effective frequency, basically responding within 15 to 30 minutes after someone has requested a service via smartphone app, booking tool, or for those without smartphones, say a customer call center. And ultimately, this all feeds into our overall network. How do these things work together? Microtransit hubs and bus routes, in thinking of how we can really break away from what we typically have now, which is a more hub and spoke system that everything comes into a central hub and then has to go back out. And that then if you're just going across town, you have to transfer at that single hub. And now we can consider other network designs that really create more crosstown connections and more hubs outside of a center hub. So when we think of the toolbox of what's available for bus, I think this is a helpful graphic because it makes folks realize there's a lot more than just what you may see as a typical bus route, especially what CATS operates now. For most of our services, typically, pretty much a 40-foot standard local bus, as you see in the upper left picture. However, of course, we do also have express bus today, and that's much more peak focused, but it doesn't have to be. You can have limited stop services that travel faster or skip stops. You can have more that can actually operate all day. It doesn't have to be peak restricted. You can further enhance that service by branding it, giving it kind of a name, and also kind of enhancing all the stops to be more like stations or very high quality enhanced stops. You can even, and that starts getting into levels of what's called bus rapid transit, especially if you have a dedicated guideway or dedicated space within a street. That's BRT, and sometimes you then also have higher capacity vehicles, as you see pictured there as an articulated bus. But microtransit, again, in that picture you see is more the smaller vehicles, and that's where the name actually micro comes from, is small, typically smaller fleet. And then like transportation network companies, or the most common which people know usually are Uber or Lyft, they can operate more directly on demand to reach, to provide more point-to-point service. Although unlike TNCs like Uber or Lyft, microtransit does, of course, pool trips like public transportation. But a benefit, again, of microtransit is it doesn't necessarily have to have a physical stop to serve, and actually can go beyond where a bus stop may not be the most convenient location to access, and get one closer to their destination, perhaps even a virtual stop that is, say, inside a shopping center or inside a parking lot, to shorten one's walk to one's destination. So I think now we're going to transition to the more interactive section of today's presentation, by having some opportunity for some survey questions that will be live. Again, though, I encourage you to go to the website. You see there's a QR code at the bottom of the screen, or you can actually go to slido.com, slido.com, and enter that code, those numbers you see, and you can access the survey live, because you'll get to see how people are voting collectively. So these first few questions, we're asking kind of what in your mind, your preference could be better done to convey or to symbolize a lot of how transit works, especially bus service. Bus service, even though we're trying to maximize directness of route, they still often are not quite as direct as, say, a rail line. But at the same time, rail line maps usually are often much easier to read to folks because it's very logical in terms of a straight line and where stations are. So how can we make bus route maps, and especially system or individual route maps, more legible, more easier to understand? And so we have some examples, I think about 5 for you to choose from. So these first couple examples you see, we have one from Nashville and one from Durham. But don't pick them based on what your favorite place is. Think about how they're being portrayed visually. So, you can see that there's opportunities here, how you can display what are called time points or major transfer points, how you can symbolize the streets that the route travels on, and how you can either use thickness of line or colors to distinguish those things, and even show other primary highways and roadways in the background, riverways. And then on the right, which is actually Durham, but that shows you how you can actually symbolize a variant. Oh, okay. Is your Zoom still connected?
We'll pause for a moment to let people log on to that Slido. So we'll pause for a moment to let everybody log on to that Slido, and we will put that information back on the screen. It's also in the chat, but I'll just take a moment while people join the Slido to let everyone know we do have some meetings upcoming. So this is our first meeting of this July series of meetings, and we'll have in-person meetings next week. So starting Monday, July 15th, we'll be at the Davidson Gateway Park and Ride from 6 to 8 a.m. On July 16th, we'll be at the Huntersville Gateway Park and Ride from 6 to 8 a.m. July 17th, we'll be at the Cornelius Park and Ride from 6 to 8 a.m. And then July 18th, we will be at the Huntersville North Cross Park and Ride from 6 to 8 a.m. And then after that, we'll be at the Charlotte Transportation Center in Uptown Charlotte from 11:30 to 1, 11:30 a.m. to 1 p.m., and then 4:30 to 6 p.m. All right, just a moment while we get the Slido up and running. I cannot see the votes.
Okay.
Is
So
the Slido working?
We're not to that slide yet.
yeah, so thank you for your patience. So here's some more examples. You saw the Nashville, Durham previously. Now here's Seattle and Columbus. But again, don't pick them based on your favorite state or place. But think about how they're showing the symbolizing the transit lines in these maps, using color, using background geographic information, symbology. And we're going to ask you in a moment which of these you think is your favorite. Because if you think about when you travel someplace new, you have to take a risk, right? When you take transit, and especially a place you've never taken it before, we want to be quickly conveyed to anyone, especially our existing riders, but anyone who's going to try us out, to know, where does this go? Where does this route go? How can I connect to other routes? So think about those things and think about from your own personal experience, if you saw these maps, which one do you think it would be friendliest or easiest to use? On 5, which is that's just from Portland, and this shows actually, well, it's actually a streetcar line, but then if you thought of it as a bus route, would show all stops, which some people often ask, well, why does the map for route show every single stop? So here's an option of what that could possibly look like. So having seen all 5, and I think we still show them on a smaller version, we can activate the Slido survey. We now, if you've gone to the QR code or the web link and enter that code, you can actually vote live in terms of which of these 5 is just your personal preference, in terms of which of these you think you would use. We'll give some time for our folks to answer. Okay. Well, we're having some issues with the live polling, but we do want to remind you, of course, we do have that on our publicinput.com/betterbus survey. And it's showing, okay. So I think actually the issues with Zoom, not with Slido. So we do have the survey you can still take. We're just having issues right now showing you the live, how people are voting.
Yeah, so the survey is the live survey is up and running. I can see some results coming in now. We're just having some connection issues, so we appreciate everyone's patience.
Maybe while we're waiting, we can remind folks, if you do have a question, you can enter into the chat. Allie's graciously helping by monitoring those questions. And so I encourage you to, if you see a slido.com survey, please still provide your personal response, your preference. If you don't see it on our shared presentation, it's being recorded. And maybe we can take questions if we're waiting on have there been questions entered in the chat?
Yeah, there are some questions in the chat, Brian, if you want to answer those while we're waiting for the slides to come back up. Okay. So first question, is there a way to get something to go through the Whitehall Commons Shopping Center in Southwest Charlotte?
Yes, so yeah, near Steel Creek or off of 485 Airwood Tryon area, that is the Whitehall Shopping Center. And historically, actually, there was bus service that went into that shopping center, but historically it was more of a turnaround, or the routes didn't go as farther. When the routes were extended farther out to, say, Rivergate and the Charlotte Premium Outlets, that service was straightened out on Tryon Airwood to make for a faster overall trip. But the trade-off there, of course, and I think that's the concern we're seeing, is it worth it for that trade-off, though, then now that the access to that shopping center is off of Tryon and Airwood, because those streets, especially for pedestrians, and all of CAT's customers are pedestrian when they get on or off a bus, even if they park at one end and a park and ride, still have to use another bus stop. It's maybe not the nicest environment today to use transit, because it's kind of a more auto-oriented environment. So that's a consideration. Even though there's a principle of making a route as direct as possible, if the built environment is not that pedestrian friendly, maybe we should still.
Thanks, Brian. We have another question here, which is, what is the association with this project and Envision My Ride?
Yes, thanks for that question. So Envision My Ride all the tools of well, we're applying the same tools, but now we have to look at more near-term financially constrained opportunities, because we really want a plan that can be implemented in the near future. And so we're not dating it where we can, but we're really looking for the components of it that could be near-term implemented. So for example, there were like 20 high frequency routes in the Envision My Ride plan. Well, all those things, of course, quickly add up, especially if you're going from 30 minutes to 15 minutes on like over almost 20 routes to right now in the CAS system. And so we kind of have to look at, well, which routes maybe make sense to go high frequency first, but also too, is there opportunity to maybe straighten or directly connect those routes in a way that would afford maybe more high frequency routes? Perhaps not all the routes have to go uptown, instead of forcing a transfer in uptown. Like say, a route on the east side may be connected with a route on the west side that goes through uptown, but has high frequency all the way along the route. Oh, and I think our survey is up and running again, or at least the part of it to share on the screen. So as you can see here, we have live polling based on how people are answering. And so far, map 5, and the Portland example, it shows every single stop, albeit that streetcar, but applicable to bus, seems to be leading, closely followed by, as a tie, the ones in Nashville and Columbus, and their symbology of kind of more graphic representation. All of these, I do like that they don't have, when you think of a map, and I think of like Washington, D.C. has such an iconic metro system, subway system map that really symbolizes that in a way that's graphic instead of having to be exactly the same as the actual geography, smoothing out the curves of the river between Virginia and Maryland and making a symbol for where the boundaries of the district are. So great. Thanks to everybody for participating. And again, this is not the end-all capture of this, as we do have that publicinput.com survey as well, but appreciate those who have responded today. Looks like nobody chose map 2. Maybe it's a little too busy, the Seattle example. Great. So this next question is a pretty simple one, but please just select all the places where you take transit. Of course, this will adjust as people answer, but right now, work is in the lead. And that's not surprising because when we think of all travel, not just transit trips, but even courses, also a big part of those trips, especially at peak periods, of course. But post-pandemic, people are traveling more and more outside of just peak periods. And then we have entertainment second. If when you go to major transit, it's a good competitive mode of travel to reach, entertainment, like concerts. Of course, sporting events is listed separately, but those two also often have parking constraints. School, many of our, school-age children or those in college, even if you have the ability to drive, they don't want to, or it's a hassle to have a car on campus or find a way to, go car free. It can be really liberating for a lot of students, especially those, of course, who are school age and can drive. Errands and shopping and dining, all rounding out the choices there. Well, great. So this next question is, how often do you take transit? Good. And this is actual. If you answered what you would like to do but aren't currently doing, that's okay too. But right now they're all about evenly tied. Thankfully, nobody's saying never. You're currently taking transit, but you would like to take transit, and so that's why you maybe don't currently. So right now, sometimes it's winning out. Two with the hybrid work schedules, although more people are going back as every day if work is the primary reason they take transit. Great. Great. So this next one is interesting because you heard make transit competitive to be more like Uber, Lyft, and go more places. Well, also how you pay to go on transit. We have technology now that maybe you can use an app to also pay. Not always necessarily carry cash, but those who maybe would be unbanked or maybe not have a smartphone, maybe they need options too, like say a grocery store or pharmacy to load up a fair payment card. Can sometimes be a hassle to carry cash and obviously pay on a bus. Of course, thankfully, our fare boxes do have options now that you don't have to have cash when you get on the bus. All right, so now this one's getting more into those transit planning trade-offs that we talked about earlier. So I know there's a lot of words here. So basically each of the situation and the trade-offs between, how long you have to wait for a bus, how fast you get to your destination, how far you have to walk to and from the bus stop. And so each of these given those trade-offs. So for example, the first one that's leading right now is I prefer to walk up to 10 minutes. Maybe your walk's a little bit longer, but you have a shorter overall bus ride. And even maybe a single seat ride or direct ride that doesn't require transfers. The next one that's in second currently, you want a short walk and prefer not to transfer, but even if the travel time is longer, this might be perhaps like popular with seniors or others who, really value that you don't have to walk very far and you're not going to have to transfer, but maybe the overall travel time or ride is a little bit longer. And then the newest one that popped up or is tied, you want a short walk to high frequency if you're transferring from one high frequency to another high frequency. Like if you've ever taken subway systems in major cities, you're not so concerned sometimes when you see, that single line doesn't go from point A to point B, but you might have to transfer. It's okay when you're going from one high frequency route to another high frequency route or line. Okay. Right. Now, talked a little bit about this earlier because maybe some folks rarely or never take transit. Well, maybe there's some challenges. Or even if you do take transit, maybe it's a bad walking environment or it's not a great experience today. Buses maybe not reliable as it's running on schedule. So what are some of your challenges, particular biggest challenges with transit currently? Either by actually riding or it's a barrier to why you don't ride more often or at all. Right. Well, I think the poll's still gathering responses. It's just, again, not showing the live as people vote. So maybe time for another question, Natalie.
Sounds good. Yeah, we'll roll with it here. So while we're waiting, folks, just want to remind everyone in the chat, there is a lot of information about where you can reach out to if your questions aren't addressed today, or if you think of other feedback later. And then if you're not able to join the live survey, we will also put the link to the survey that should be open through next week. And that will be in the caption of this video, as well as on our social media channels and our other channels of communication. So one question that we have right now in the chat, let's see here. So can you go over the timeline of this project again?
Okay. Yeah, it's basically a year-long study plan. And there'll be 3 key phases of public outreach, in which we're currently in the first phase, which is really just kind of that early input issues, early concerns, and kind of just checking in with kind of goals and guiding principles. That's where we are now. But as we move along, next phase, we're really starting to hone in on what are those early recommendations that we think, building upon the Envision My Ride, which again is that foundation of really good tools, but wasn't really financially constrained. Picking from that, what we think near term is really strong as an implementation strategy that would really achieve a lot of bus improvement, maybe high return on investment, or really popular, or really strong in travel, or in growing ridership. All this, if it checks a lot of boxes, does it make sense to really advance that early phase of what still builds the overall Envision My Ride long term, but doing those incremental pieces first? And so coming back to the public with those early ideas and getting then again public reaction to that. Does it make sense if we do that first as a priority in the near term? And then lastly, the last phase, of course, will be putting it all together, finishing the plan, and really leading into that early service change implementation by making sure.
Thanks, Brian. Another question that we have here, when will we see more specific recommendations for changes in this project?
Sure. Building on the last response, phases 2 and 3. So those are timed. I'm sorry, I should have said when those are timed. It's the overall year. We're right now in summer of 2024. That's phase 1. When we get into the more phase 2 and 3, phase 2 is expected in fall of this year, and that in 2025, early next year, really the final recommendations.
Thanks, Brian. I think we're about to start back up with the live survey, hopefully here. Just a moment, folks. All right, let's answer one more question, Brian, while we're waiting here. Is this the project that includes bus stop improvements like benches and shelters?
So CAS has updated our overall bus stop policies. We used to only install benches or shelters where we had the ridership that corresponded to that, but that was kind of chicken or what came first, chicken or egg, or as some in transportation planning like to say, oh, don't build a bridge if nobody's swimming across the river. But we've really changed that. We've thought more proactively how we can improve our bus stops, especially where we want to support access to major destinations, or there's special needs, like if there's a senior center, rec center, if we're anticipating a future mobility hub, really that's an important place to transfer from one route to the next. So we no longer look just at our existing ridership to warrant or make justification to improving to a bench or a shelter, but actually now we're more proactive in identifying those. In fact, my colleague who's on the call, I know Bruce Jones, his team, they've actually ranked all of our stops. So we've looked at the needs already for all of our stops to have improvements of a waiting pad, potentially seating, amenities, Of course, though, the improvement of that, actually implementing it, is what takes time, unfortunately. CATS does not own any of the streets or highways we travel on. We sometimes own the land if we pull off street, into a transit center or park or ride station, but generally we're operating others' rights of way. So there's a lot of coordination. There's sometimes real estate, um, and developing plans and designs program now to develop or to improve a lot more bus stops consistently each year. And we make sure that those are throughout our greater Charlotte Mecklenburg community, including our towns, that their bus stops be improved, not just in Charlotte, but throughout Mecklenburg.
Thanks, Brian. Well, I know Brian has been talking quite a lot on this presentation, so I'll give him a chance to catch his breath and drink some water. And I'll go over just some important information for you all to have. I'm also putting this information in the chat, but I just want to remind everyone, besides this live survey, we will have a survey open, and that link is in the chat or in the caption of this video if you're catching us after we're in this live session. And then we also have pop-up meetings throughout next week. So if the technical issues are inhibiting you from getting any information that you need, we will definitely be around in person next week at various park and rides and also the CTC to answer your questions. And then if any of your questions or feedback aren't addressed in this live session, please feel free to email betterbus@publicinput.com. Thank you so much for being here today, folks. Oh, we do have another question in the chat, Brian, if you're up for it. What is the timeline for Independence Boulevard express routes to start utilizing the bus lanes?
Okay, great. And of course, my colleague who also helps with bus stops knows this answer, but I'll go ahead and take it. But or answer the question. But basically, we are planning for our October service change. We are hopeful to be back in the Independence Busway that's currently being modified back to what was an exclusive space for CATS buses to travel in the middle of Independence Boulevard. Now, the state or in North Carolina Department of Transportation does have its own project that is not yet started, and it's funded in a future year to actually share that space, similar to Interstate 77 in North Charlotte and North Mecklenburg, that would allow those who pay a space, and that congestion pricing would keep the lanes moving. But initially, when the busway reopens, it will be again an exclusive space for CATS, and we anticipate that. We're hopeful that our October service change this year.
We do have one more question here. This is pertaining to the map examples that you showed earlier on in the presentation. Will we be able to see landmarks like museums or schools on the maps?
We, as part of the study, have some interactive maps, and we are thinking about how to best share that. It's kind of like a dashboard story map, other interactive websites that will have mapping features. So it's quite possible that goes. I know definitely our events will have that. And kind of look at, we have kind of a tool today that already has that as a mapping layer, but we'll definitely share. I mean, everything is becoming more visual with technology, so definitely want something that's more interactive than static. We've identified a lot of points of interest. We know in not just, of course, Charlotte, but Greater Mecklenburg, various places that are of community interest, especially for needs of those who use transit or need to access transit to travel to those places. So when we present any of these recommendations, we'll be very thoughtful about how, and hopefully in a better way, that those recommendations are serving those places.
Thanks, Brian. We still are working to get oh yeah. I think we're able to get up the screen share again and get the live survey going. So we'll give that just a minute. In the meantime, I just want to remind everyone that yes, we have this series of meetings, and we will be doing community engagement throughout, the summer. And we really appreciate your feedback. So if you have any ideas for where you'd like to see us come speak or hold future meetings, please let us know, and you can email betterbus@publicinput.com. We appreciate any feedback. And I think we're still having some technical issues, so we'll just give it another minute. If folks have questions, you can enter those in the chat. And like I said, although we're having some issues with the live survey, the survey that's on our website on the Better Bus page is the same question. So please go and leave your feedback there, and we'll be pushing that out on our social media feeds and other channels of communications that we have. And then feel free to come speak with us in person at the pop-up in-person meetings next week. Okay, folks, thank you so much for tuning in today. Like I said, we have meetings coming up next week. We have an email address you can send any more questions or feedback to. There's lots of ways to reach us. We appreciate you coming to watch today, and we'll look forward to talking to you all in the future and hearing your feedback for this project.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.